The air inside the cell is already suffocating. 146 men, women pressed against the walls, gasping. The June heat of Bengal turns the 18-foot square room into an oven. Outside, the victorious soldiers of Siraj-ud-Dawla, Nawab of Bengal, celebrate their conquest of Fort William. Inside, in what the British will call the Black Hole of Calcutta, people are dying. It is the night of the 20th of June, 1756. John Zephaniah Holwell, a surgeon turned company administrator, finds himself in command not through valor but through abandonment. The governor fled. The garrison surrendered. Now Holwell and his companions endure what contemporary accounts will describe as hell itself. Men claw at the single barred window, others collapse, trampled underfoot. The darkness echoes with desperate prayers in English, Portuguese, and the local tongues. By dawn, when the guards finally open the door, only 23 souls will emerge alive. This single night of horror will echo across continents and centuries. Within months, news of the Black Hole reaches London, igniting public fury. The incident becomes a rallying cry, a justification, a wound that demands retribution. Yet the vengeance that follows will prove far more consequential than the crime. For the man who answers that call, a former clerk named Robert Clive, will not merely avenge the dead. He will, through a mixture of military audacity and political conspiracy, lay the foundations of the British Raj. The Battle of Plassey, fought almost exactly 1 year after that suffocating night, lasts barely 11 hours. British casualties number fewer than 30. Yet this engagement, more political theater than military contest, transfers control of Bengal, one of the world's richest provinces, from Indian hands to company coffers. It marks the beginning of the end for Mughal authority in India and the start of British territorial empire in Asia. This is a story of outrage and opportunism, of genuine atrocity and calculated response. It asks uncomfortable questions about how narratives of victimhood can justify conquest, and how a trading company transformed itself into an imperial power. Most importantly, it examines how one man, neither particularly noble nor uniquely villainous, found himself at the fulcrum of history and did not hesitate to push. Robert Clive was not born to greatness. He entered the world on the 29th of September, 1725, in the Shropshire market town of Styche, the eldest son of a modest gentry family of limited means and declining fortune. His early years suggested nothing of the imperial architect he would become. Contemporary accounts describe a difficult, quarrelsome boy prone to depression and given to organizing his schoolmates into gangs. His father, despairing of the youth's prospects in England, secured him a position as a lowly writer, essentially a clerk in the East India Company's service at Madras. Clive arrived in India in June 1744, aged 18, poor, awkward, and utterly without connections. The posting seemed less opportunity than exile. Madras itself was a humid, disease-ridden settlement where ambitious young Britons either made fortunes or died trying. Clive, assigned to accounting ledgers and copying correspondence, appeared destined for neither distinction nor survival. In a moment of profound desperation during his first year, he twice attempted to take his own life, first by pistol, which misfired, then by other means. His contemporaries declined to specify in detail. That he survived these dark episodes would prove historically significant. The transformation from suicidal clerk to military commander came through circumstance rather than design. When war erupted between France and Britain in 1744, the conflict inevitably spread to their rival trading companies in India. In 1746, French forces under Bertrand François Mahe de la Bourdonnais besieged and captured Madras. Clive found himself a prisoner, though he soon escaped and made his way to Fort St. David, the company's remaining stronghold in the Carnatic. There, With the company's civil service in disarray, he accepted a commission as ensign in the company's military forces. He was 21 years old and had never fired a shot in anger. What Clive possessed, what his superiors only gradually recognized, was an extraordinary capacity for decisive action under pressure and an utter absence of conventional military thinking. Unburdened by formal training, he simply did what seemed necessary, regardless of doctrine or precedent. This would prove his greatest asset. His reputation was forged at Arcot in 1751. The Second Carnatic War had engulfed southern India in a proxy struggle between British and French trading interests, each backing rival claimants to local thrones. When French-supported forces besieged the company's ally at Trichinopoly, Clive proposed an audacious diversion. He would seize Arcot, the capital of the Carnatic, with just 200 European soldiers and 300 sepoys locally recruited Indian infantry. His superiors, desperate for any tactical advantage, approved. On the 31st of August, 1751, Clive's tiny force marched through a monsoon storm and occupied the virtually undefended city. What followed tested not merely courage, but endurance. For 53 days, Clive's garrison, reduced by casualties and disease to fewer than 300 men, held Arcot's crumbling fort against a Franco-Indian army numbering 10,000, supported by elephants and artillery. The defenders faced repeated assaults, including attempts to breach the walls using armored elephants. When reinforcements finally arrived, Clive didn't merely hold his position. He sallied forth and routed the besiegers. The Siege of Arcot made Clive famous. In London, where news arrived months later, he was hailed as a hero who had saved British interests in India. In Madras, he was promoted to captain and given command of increasingly important operations. More significantly, he had proven that European discipline and firepower, properly applied, could overcome vastly superior numbers of Indian forces, armed primarily with outdated weapons and handicapped by divided command. But Arcot also revealed something troubling about Clive's character, an appetite for wealth that bordered on the rapacious. Victory brought not merely glory but spoils, prize money, gifts from grateful allies, opportunities for private trading. Clive discovered that military success in India could be extraordinarily lucrative. This realization would shape all his subsequent actions. Between 1751 and 1756, Clive solidified his reputation through a series of campaigns in southern India. He won the Battle of Caverpak, captured the French settlement at Covelong, and helped secure the Carnatic for the company's ally Muhammad Ali. Each success brought promotion, wealth, and confidence. By 1756, when he sailed to Bengal, Clive was a lieutenant colonel commanding his own regiment, a remarkable rise for someone who had arrived in India as a depressed clerk just 12 years earlier. Yet Bengal was not the Carnatic. The province sprawled across the Ganges Delta, one of the most populous and productive regions on Earth. Its textile workshops supplied much of the world's cotton cloth. Its agricultural surplus fed millions. Its Nawab commanded resources that dwarfed those of any southern princeling. The East India Company maintained profitable factories in Bengal, at Calcutta, at Kasim Bazar, at Dhaka, but these existed purely on the Nawab's sufferance. The company was a trader, not a territorial power. Not yet. That calculation would change on a single June night in 1756, when the doors closed on the Black Hole of Calcutta and Clive's destiny shifted from soldier of fortune to empire builder. To understand how the Black Hole came to be, one must first understand Siraj-ud-Dowlah. The young Nawab ascended to power in April 1756, aged approximately 23, following the death of his grandfather Alivardi Khan. Siraj inherited not merely a throne but a web of tensions between Mughal authority and local autonomy, between indigenous merchants and European traders, between loyalty and conspiracy. His court seethed with rivals, uncles passed over for succession, generals hungry for power, bankers anxious about their investments. The British had been fortifying Fort William without the Nawab's permission, expanding their arsenal in preparation for potential French aggression. To Siraj, this looked like preparation for rebellion. When he demanded the British cease their fortifications and surrender a fugitive who had taken refuge in Calcutta, the company's officials, led by Governor Roger Drake, responded with calculated insult. They would neither stop building nor surrender the refugee. Siraj responded with overwhelming force. On the 16th of June, 1756, an army estimated at 50,000 infantry and cavalry, supported by war elephants and artillery, descended upon Calcutta. Fort William, never designed to withstand a major siege, held barely 500 defenders, many of them locally recruited troops of dubious reliability. The outcome was never in doubt. What happened next has been debated by historians for centuries. As the Nawab's forces breached the outer defenses, Governor Roger Drake made a decision that would stain his name forever. He fled. Along with several senior company officials and their families, Drake commandeered ships moored on the Hooghly River and sailed downstream to safety, abandoning the garrison and civilian residents to their fate. Command fell to John Zephaniah Holwell, the senior official who remained not through courage particularly, but through the accident of being ashore when the ships departed. The fort fell on the 20th of June. By late afternoon, the Union flag was torn down and replaced with the Nawab's colors. Holwell surrendered, expecting the customary treatment accorded to defeated garrisons. Instead, confusion in the chain of command led to a decision that would reverberate through imperial history. The surviving prisoners, the number remains disputed, but Holwell claimed 146 were confined overnight in the fort's punishment cell, a room measuring approximately 14 feet by 18 feet. Holwell's account, published upon his return to England, described unimaginable suffering. The June heat, typically exceeding 90 degrees Fahrenheit, combined with the crush of bodies, made breathing nearly impossible. Men fought desperately for access to the single barred window. Some went mad, others fainted and were trampled. Holwell himself survived by positioning himself near the window, though he collapsed repeatedly from heat stroke and dehydration. When the guards opened the door at 6 o'clock the following morning, he reported that 123 prisoners had died. Only 23 emerged alive. Modern historians have questioned the numbers, some suggesting as few as 18 deaths, others arguing the entire incident may have been exaggerated for propaganda purposes. What remains beyond dispute is that people died unnecessarily through callous disregard for prisoners' welfare, and that the British public, when news reached London that autumn, reacted with predictable fury. The Black Hole became a symbol of Oriental despotism and British victimhood, conveniently obscuring the provocations that had triggered Siraj's attack. Retribution came swiftly. In Madras, Governor-General George Pigott and Admiral Charles Watson assembled an expeditionary force, 5 Royal Navy warships, 900 European soldiers, and 1,500 sepoys, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Robert Clive. The fleet sailed northward in October 1756, reaching the Hooghly River estuary in December. On the 2nd of January, 1757, British forces recaptured Calcutta with minimal resistance. The Nawab's garrison, poorly paid and inadequately supplied, melted away. Clive, however, sought more than mere reoccupation. On the 9th of February, after a brief military encounter at the village of Calcutta, renamed Alanagar by the British to mark the recapture, he negotiated the Treaty of Alanagar with Siraj-ud-Dawla. The treaty restored all the company's previous privileges, granted permission for fortification, and compensated British losses. Siraj, facing a more immediate threat from Ahmad Shah Durrani's Afghan army invading from the northwest, accepted these terms to secure his eastern flank, but the treaty was merely a pause. Neither side trusted the other. Clive recognized that as long as Siraj ruled Bengal, British interests remained vulnerable. Siraj, for his part, understood that the company now represented a political as well as commercial threat. The stage was set not for reconciliation but for final confrontation. The conspiracy that would destroy Siraj-ud-Dawla was set in motion by William Watts, the company's representative at Qasim Bazar. Watts reported to Clive that significant factions at the Nawab's court opposed their ruler. Mir Jafar, the commander-in-chief, felt slighted and feared for his position. The Jagat Seth banking family worried that Siraj would confiscate their enormous wealth. Rai Durlab, the revenue minister, harbored ambitions of his own. All might be persuaded to betray their Nawab in exchange for British support. Clive seized the opportunity with characteristic audacity. Through a series of secret negotiations, he offered Mir Jafar an irresistible proposition. If Mir Jafar would defect during battle, or, better yet, refuse to fight, the British would depose Siraj and install Mir Jafar as Nawab. In return, the company would receive vast monetary compensation, trading privileges, and territorial concessions, including the 24 parganas around Calcutta. The agreement was formalized in a secret treaty signed in early June 1757. One complication threatened to expose the plot. Omichund, a wealthy Hindu merchant who served as intermediary between the conspirators, discovered the arrangement and demanded 5% of the Nawab's treasure as his price for silence. Clive's solution demonstrated both his tactical cunning and his flexible ethics. He created two treaties, one genuine document promising Omichund nothing, signed by all parties, and one fraudulent document promising him everything, which Admiral Watson refused to sign. Clive forged Watson's signature. When the conspiracy succeeded, Omichund discovered his promised fortune was worthless ink on worthless paper. The shock reportedly drove him mad. On the 23rd of June, 1757, exactly 1 year and 3 days after the Black Hole tragedy, Clive's army of approximately 3,000 men, including roughly 900 Europeans and 2,000 sepoys, supported by 8 field guns, marched north from Calcutta towards Murshidabad, the Nawab's capital. They encountered Siraj-ud-Dawla's forces at Plassey, a village dominated by a mango grove called Laksha Bagh, on the banks of the Hooghly River. The Nawab commanded a vastly superior force, 50,000 infantry and cavalry, approximately 40 cannon, and 10 war elephants. On paper, the British were hopelessly outnumbered. In reality, the battle was over before it began. The engagement commenced at 8 o'clock in the morning, when Mir Madan Khan, one of Siraj's few loyal commanders, ordered his French-trained artillery to open fire. An artillery duel ensued across the open plain separating the two armies. Then, at approximately 11 o'clock, the monsoon struck. Heavy rain swept across the battlefield, drenching both armies. British artillerymen, trained in European methods, immediately covered their guns and powder with tarpaulins. The Nawab's gunners, lacking such preparation, watched helplessly as their ammunition became waterlogged and useless. When the rain ceased, Clive ordered his artillery to resume fire. Now possessing overwhelming firepower superiority, British guns methodically targeted the Nawab's remaining active artillery positions. Mir Madan, attempting to rally his gunners at the front, was struck by a cannonball and killed the single most significant casualty of the battle. With Mir Madan dead, the Nawab's army lost its one committed commander. At this crucial moment, Mir Jafar and the other conspirators revealed their treachery. Commanding perhaps 2/3 of the Nawab's army, they simply refused to advance. When Siraj ordered them forward, they claimed their troops needed rest, or their ammunition was exhausted, or the position was disadvantageous. In reality, they were waiting for their Nawab to lose, so they might win. Clive, recognizing that much of the enemy force remained stationary, ordered a general advance. His disciplined infantry moved steadily forward, supported by artillery and cavalry. What followed was less a battle than a rout. The Nawab's remaining loyal troops, seeing themselves betrayed and outnumbered by their own countrymen's defection, broke and fled. Siraj ud-Daulah himself, mounted on his fastest camel, abandoned the field and raced towards Murshidabad, hoping to gather supporters and defend his capital. By 5 o'clock that afternoon, the Battle of Plassey was over. British casualties totaled 22 dead and 50 wounded. The Nawab's forces lost approximately 500 men, though many more deserted or were captured. It was, by any military measure, a trivial engagement. Yet its consequences would reshape a subcontinent. Siraj ud-Daulah did not live to see the full extent of his defeat. After fleeing Plassey, he reached Murshidabad and briefly considered organizing resistance, but the conspiracy had penetrated too deeply. On the 2nd of July, 1757, just 9 days after the battle, he was captured. Whilst attempting to escape disguised as a merchant, Mir Jafar, now installed as Nawab through British arms, ordered Siraj executed. The young man who had ruled Bengal for barely 14 months was murdered by Mir Jafar's son, Miran, on the night of the 2nd of July. He was approximately 24 years old. Mir Jafar ascended to the Masnad, the ceremonial throne, as Nawab of Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. The British celebrated their puppet's installation with appropriate ceremony, yet everyone understood the new reality. Mir Jafar ruled at the company's pleasure and with the company's soldiers enforcing his authority. The ancient Mughal administrative structure remained nominally intact, but real power had shifted to the council chambers of Fort William. The immediate spoils proved extraordinary. Under the Treaty of Plassey's terms, the company received approximately £2.5 million, roughly £400 million in today's currency, in compensation and gifts. Individual officers and officials received massive personal fortunes. Clive himself acquired £234,000, plus an annual Jagir revenue grant worth £30,000. These sums made him one of the wealthiest men in Britain overnight. Admiral Watson received £100,000. Even junior officers walked away with fortunes that would have taken a lifetime to accumulate through normal commerce. But money was the least significant consequence of Plassey. What truly changed was the nature of the East India Company itself. For 157 years, since its founding in 1600, the company had operated as a trading enterprise, albeit one with private armies for self-defense. After Plassey, it increasingly functioned as a territorial power, collecting revenue, administering justice, and conducting diplomacy. The transformation from merchant to sovereign had begun. In 1765, this transition became official when Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II granted the company, the Diwani, the right to collect revenue for Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. This single grant provided the company with an annual income exceeding £3 million, funds that financed further expansion and military adventures across India. The company was no longer merely in India, it was increasingly becoming India's government. Why was Plassey, this relatively minor skirmish, forgotten whilst other battles achieved lasting fame? Part of the answer lies in its very success. The battle's outcome depended less on British military prowess than on Indian political betrayal. Celebrating Plassey, too, enthusiastically meant celebrating conspiracy, bribery, and forgery, uncomfortable foundations for imperial legitimacy. As the Victorian era progressed, and the British Raj sought to present itself as a force for order and good governance, the sordid details of Plassey's conspiracy became somewhat embarrassing. Moreover, Clive himself became controversial. His later career was marked by corruption scandals that shocked even the tolerant standards of 18th-century colonial administration. During his second term as governor of Bengal from 1765 to 1767, he amassed further wealth through practices that critics labeled as little more than sanctioned theft. When he returned to Britain, parliamentary inquiries investigated his conduct. Though he famously declared before the House of Commons in 1772 that he was amazed at his own moderation in not taking even more wealth, the investigations tarnished his reputation. On the 22nd of November, 1774, Robert Clive took his own life at his London home, age 49. He reportedly slit his throat with a paper knife. No inquest was held. Samuel Johnson, the great moralist of the age, remarked, "He acquired his fortune by such crimes that his consciousness of them impelled him to cut his own throat." Whether this assessment was fair remains debated, but it reflected contemporary ambivalence about Clive and his methods. The military lessons of Plassey, however, endured. British commanders absorbed its core insight. In India, political maneuvering might prove more decisive than battlefield tactics. Victory came not merely through superior weaponry or discipline, but through exploiting the fissures within Indian polities, playing rival factions against each other, offering bribes and threats in calibrated measures, presenting British power as a source of stability rather than subjugation. This became the template for expansion across the subcontinent over the following century. Yet Plassey also established a dangerous precedent: the conflation of personal enrichment with imperial duty. The fortunes Clive and his officers extracted from Bengal helped normalize the idea that India existed to be plundered, that immense personal wealth was the natural reward for service, and that company officials deserved compensation far exceeding their nominal salaries. This culture of corruption would plague the way Company's administration until Parliament finally dissolved it after the Indian Rebellion of 1857. The black hole itself faded from memory more slowly. Throughout the 19th century, it remained a touchstone of imperial mythology, proof positive that British presence in India was justified by native despotism and cruelty. A monument erected in Calcutta commemorated the victims, though it was removed after Indian independence in 1947. Modern scholarship has questioned both the numbers and the narrative, noting that Holwell's account, published years after the event, may have been embellished for propaganda purposes. Some historians suggest as few as 18 prisoners died, not 123. Others argue the entire incident resulted from confusion rather than deliberate cruelty. Regardless of the precise details, the black hole served its purpose. It provided moral justification for Plassey and the conquests that followed. Vengeance for British victims excused the subjugation of Bengal's millions. The suffering of 146 prisoners, real and terrible though it was, became the pretext for an imperial project that would endure for 2 centuries. Stand today in Kolkata, the city that was Calcutta, and you will find little trace of these events. The old Fort William was demolished and rebuilt on a different site. The mango grove at Plassey has long since been cultivated for agriculture. The black hole's location is marked by a small plaque, if at all. The city has moved on, as cities must, from the traumas and triumphs of its past. Yet the consequences of that single year, 1756 to 1757, remain inescapable. The Battle of Plassey marked the beginning of the end for independent governance in India. Within a century, the entire subcontinent would fall under British rule, administered first by the Company and later by the Crown. The wealth extracted from Bengal, both immediate spoils and long-term revenue, financed Britain's industrial revolution and global expansion. India became, in Disraeli's phrase, the jewel in the crown of the British Empire. For military historians, Plassey demonstrates an uncomfortable truth. Battles are not always won by superior tactics or courage. Sometimes they are decided before the first shot is fired. in the councils of conspirators and the calculation of bribes. Clive's genius lay not in military innovation but in recognizing that Indian political fragmentation could be exploited more effectively than Indian armies could be defeated. This insight, more than any battlefield victory, established British dominance in India. Modern assessments of Clive range from admiration to condemnation, often simultaneously. He was undoubtedly brave. His repeated exposure to personal danger proved that. He was militarily gifted. Arcot demonstrated genuine tactical skill, but he was also rapacious, unscrupulous, and willing to employ any method, forgery, bribery, betrayal, to achieve his objectives. He represents both the best and worst of his age, the audacious self-made man who seizes opportunity, and the imperial predator who mistakes conquest for civilization. The Black Hole of Calcutta remains controversial. Some view it as a genuine atrocity requiring recognition and remembrance. Others see it as an exaggerated propaganda tool that justified disproportionate retaliation. The truth likely lies between these extremes. A tragedy born of confusion and callousness, subsequently weaponized for imperial purposes. What we can say, with certainty, is that vengeance, when it came, was comprehensive. For the death of 123, or 18, or 64, the number remains disputed, the British took an empire. Siraj-ud-Dowlah's execution, Mir Jafar's puppet regime, and the company's assumption of Bengal's revenues represented retribution on a scale that dwarfed the original crime. The Black Hole gave the British their casus belli. Plassey gave them India. In Clive's own words, spoken during those parliamentary hearings that would help drive him to suicide, one finds perhaps the most honest assessment of Plassey and its consequences. A great prince was dependent on my pleasure. An opulent city lay at my mercy. Its richest bankers bid against each other for my smiles. I walked through vaults which were thrown open to me alone, piled on either hand with gold and jewels. Mr. Chairman, at this moment I stand astonished at my own moderation. That word moderation captures the essential hubris of the imperial project that Plassey launched. For Clive truly believed he had been moderate, that he had taken only what was rightfully his, that India existed primarily to enrich its British administrators. This belief, more than any battle, explains how a trading company became an empire, and how a clerk from Shropshire became Clive of India. The forgotten heroes of British military history often remain forgotten for good reason. Sometimes, upon close examination, heroism proves harder to locate than we hoped. Clive and Plassey remind us that history's turning points frequently arrive not through noble deeds but through morally ambiguous bargains struck in the pursuit of wealth and power. The vengeance of Plassey was thorough. Whether it was just remains a question. Each generation must answer for itself.